There are people outside of the Bible who recognize that there was a guy named Jesus who died on a cross, and people claim to have seen him rose from the dead.
I know there's a lot of prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus supposedly fulfilled.
Yeah.
What's the probability of Jesus stumbling into some of these things? The chances of this happening is it's a 1 followed by 17 zeros. I wrote it down, a 100 quadrillion.
If the question is, how do we know outside the Bible that Jesus was really who he was? Okay. It's almost like we got to understand the seismic shift that happened within culture, within the world. So was he real? You can't escape the effect of Jesus in our culture.
Today we're talking about Jesus. And before we get there, my name's Andrew. I'm with John again, and we have a new guest. This is Josh. Josh, would you take a moment, introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Josh. Been with LCBC for about 5 years now and grew up in a Christian home. And so a lot of this stuff is familiar to me, but I remember so distinctly when I had these big questions that had to like really answer them for myself to make it my faith. And so talking about these things for me is just takes me back to a lot of those moments. And man, these are the right questions to ask. If you've got questions about faith or you're looking to, man, is this stuff reliable? Can I make my faith my own? Is it trustworthy? They're all the right questions to ask.
Military man, though, right?
Yeah, I got to serve in the Marines.
Kill a man in 3 moves.
I don't think so. Maybe
4.
Maybe 4.
Yeah.
Out of practice. It's been a hot second. Good. You hit your 30s, you're like, maybe not. But yeah, definitely didn't think I'd be working for a church. Never really had that like kind of on my horizon, and just the way God works kind of steered me that way anyway.
That's cool. Are you related to Bill Nye? That's the question.
I'm not.
The science guy.
No, I spell it differently too.
Oh,
He
okay.
spells it, I think, like it sounds, and I don't know what my ancestors were thinking, but they flipped it around. They wanted to be unique. They're like,
Yeah.
They wanted to differentiate
let's
themselves.
make our mark in history.
Nice.
Flip the Y and the E.
I love it. Well, we're glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
And man, we're getting into the topic of Jesus. And the question is are we 100% sure Jesus was real and was God? And so we'll get into a lot of stuff. I'd love to get into talking about, one, just did he exist? Did he actually exist? And is there any evidence outside of the Bible that really supports that? Who did he claim to be? Was he, did the disciples exaggerate who he was? Like just things like that. Really get into who he was. And Josh, would you mind just kicking us off, man? I know I'm not going to give you a soft lob. I'm just throwing that question at you. Are we 100% sure Jesus was real and was God?
Yeah. So I think first, just talking about Jesus being real, and you talked specifically like not looking at the Bible, looking at other sources. And so, I mean, we see real clearly that we acknowledge that he exists. I mean, for one, we kind of set our calendars by, Jesus dying and everything like that. But if you look at historians, like
no longer. Isn't
did
it?
they
did they
change
change that?
BCE and CE
Before
now.
current events,
Before Common Era.
Common Era.
Yeah.
After this
Common
podcast,
There we
we're gonna
go.
switch it back.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how this is gonna go.
Yeah.
But yeah, you see really clearly from Roman and both Jewish. So Roman, I think it's Tacitus.
Tacitus.
Thank you, John. That's why you're here.
Sure.
So he wrote about Jesus being executed under Pilate, probably about like 70 years after Jesus would have been executed, and then same with Josephus. And so you have a Jewish historian who's making that claim, and then a Roman historian who's making that claim. And so neither of them really associated with Christianity, but at least acknowledging, hey, Jesus was here, and he died underneath the government of Pontius Pilate, crucified, all those things that we would say was in the Bible too.
And I throw that out, the BCE and the CE, because I was chatting with Chat the other day, and I was like, so when was so-and-so? I forget. Oh, it might have been Ptolemy. I was like, when did Ptolemy exist? Because I thought it was the 2nd century, and I forget whether it was BCE or CE, or BC and AD. And they're like, what was it? What did it say? How did it say it? It was like, Ptolemy existed in 190 say. And I'm like, say? What the heck is say? And he's saying CE.
Yeah, as a word.
Say. And every time they brought up the date, and they're like, and that was 182, say. Or it's like, say. I'm like, all right, just say BC and AD, okay? But you're right. I mean, it's like our whole calendar is divided in half by the presence of Jesus.
Yeah. John, what about you? What would be like
I hate
your
this
opening?
question. I think it's the dumbest question. Honestly, I do.
What's wrong with the question?
Oh my gosh.
feel like it's
Everybody, okay, on the surface, it's like, okay, great. Well, let's ask, is Jesus 100% true? Like, do we know for a fact Jesus really existed? And I know I'm going to be the curmudgeon here. I'm going to be the Richard Dawkins. I don't like this question. I don't like this question because faith is fickle. I think people are fickle. They're going to say, man, if I just had this proof, then I would believe.
Mhm.
But we know that's not true. You know what I mean? Like, okay,
Mhm.
so if I have this amount of proof about something, then I'm totally going to believe it. But I think proof is like a game that we play. And I don't know
Mhm.
whether it's knowingly or unknowingly. And for some people, it's knowing, they know they're playing it. And for some people, they just kind of, it's subconscious. But how much is enough? How much proof is enough for someone to say, I choose to believe in this?
Mm.
I don't know. Can you answer that? Like, how much proof
Mhm.
does a person need? And what is 100%? What does
Mhm.
that even mean?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So that's why I hate the question.
Mhm.
I mean, look, okay, so we'll walk through,
Mhm.
we'll talk about what are the different ways that Jesus,
Yeah.
over the years, over the centuries,
Mhm.
we were able to see that Jesus existed outside of just the Bible
Mhm.
sources. But in the end, it's an unsatisfying
Mm.
question and answer, I
Mm.
think.
Mm.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to throw a
So
curveball at you, but
maybe we'll end up there, but I
yeah,
still think there's
Mm.
still, feel like there's proof that's still helpful
yeah,
on that journey, right? Like
right,
maybe there's a certain amount or a certain depth
right,
where it's like maybe I've just gone too deep, and
right.
at this point I'm not going to get much more fruit out of it. But I feel like there's got to be some layers that
Yeah.
is just helpful, right?
But I still think, okay, so I will. I
Yeah.
mean, I think we ought to go in this direction.
Mhm.
So what do we have outside the Bible? Because there's lots of it.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
it's not like a ton, but there's lots of it. But it's very much like the question. Do you remember like dating somebody, in like high school, college, whatever, and they're like, I think we need to talk, and you sit down,
Mhm.
and they're like, well, I'm just not so sure this is working, and so you give all the ways that it's going to work,
Yeah.
even though it's not working.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
it's just not going to. What's going to happen?
Mm.
Is it going to fix the relationship?
No.
Probably not.
Mhm.
So anyhow, having said
Yeah.
that, I've voiced all my skepticism
Yeah.
about this.
I'm
But
replaying all of my past dating experiences right
I
now, and it's
know.
very depressing.
but
So
Not
I
pleasant.
think it's something we can all
it's,
agree with. And
it's,
at least it totally makes sense.
yep.
So we do have lots of evidence of people who wrote outside the Bible. Like you said, Tacitus. We've got Suetonius. We've got Josephus.
Mhm.
And so all these people, they talked about Jesus. They talked about the Christ, which is interesting because now they're using the title. So just to back up, sometimes people think to themselves, okay, well, when I say Jesus Christ, I'm saying Jesus' first name and Jesus' last name is Christ, but it's not.
Mm.
Christ is Christos in Greek, which means
Mm.
the anointed one. And in the Hebrew, it's Meshach or Messiah
Mm.
is the anointed one. In the same way you might say like the Buddha.
Yeah.
The Buddha's name was Siddhartha Gautama. His title was Buddha.
Mm.
So in the same way, Christ is the title that we give to Jesus. He would have been, I can't think of Jesus' father was Joseph. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been Yeshu ben Yosef.
Hmm.
That would have been like his real name. But he's
Would Jesus have had an actual last name, like different than Christ?
well, they would have
been a
referred
different-
to him as that probably. Ben Yosef. Yeah.
Hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Like teacher going around the classroom, Yeshu ben Yosef.
Yeah.
And they would it wouldn't have been Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So having said that, though, so we see references to it from Josephus, Pliny, Tacitus, Suetonius. There's a guy later that comes on, Lucian, who actually makes fun of Christians, and he uses his name Christus, Christus. There's different ways that they vow. They put in the vowel points on this. But what's fascinating, even historians have said, like, okay, so we see in history where they mention Jesus outside of the Bible. That's great. But they've noticed how sometimes they seem to be edited. Like it'll say Jesus Christ, and then in language that's not part of the original, where it's like he was a wonder worker of many things, And so
in these historians' accounts?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So they cast doubt on these historians. But the problem is, it is in the original parts where it talks about Jesus and it talks about the crucifixion. And someone has come along later and added some things in there. He did miracles and it was amazing. Just, again, verbs and language that wasn't used in the original text. But it still doesn't get rid of the idea that there are people outside of the Bible who recognize that there was a guy named Jesus who died on the cross, and people claim to have seen him rose from the dead.
And so these people outside of the Bible, were they believers? Were they similar to the disciples? Were they like
some were Jews, some were Romans? I mean, they were just historians. They were just people who mentioned, okay, this happened in the area. So anybody, YouTube drives me nuts because like the YouTubers like, well, there's this secret thing out there that nobody knows about, and we're going to show the intrigue behind this. The church has actually hidden this from us for years. That's not true.
Gets
you don't-
clicks.
You don't have to. Yeah. You can go back to any of the original source documents by these historians, and you can see. I mean, you can read it right there in the Greek. And you know what's awesome too? Sometimes in the Bible, you can look up interlinears. So they have the Greek and the English right above it.
Right.
So you can go without knowing Greek and actually read, oh, wow, that's the word. And they referred to Jesus. And like you said, 60, 70 years after the phenomenon. And so you might say, well, why they wait 60, 70 years?
Yeah.
Well, because early on, Jesus told his disciples to go out and preach. And when they went out and preached, they weren't preaching to kings. They weren't preaching to historians. They weren't preaching to rulers. They were preaching to the marginalized and the poor and the widows and the fatherless. You know, I mean, like people who constituted the early church were not the movers and the shakers. So the movers and the shakers would have taken a while to catch up with this. And we're talking hundreds, thousands at first. And then it goes into 10,000s, 100,000. That's when they start realizing, oh, wow, this is a phenomenon, you know, and that's where the historians, so it actually authenticates the whole process.
So it's really cool that there are historians that were writing about this outside the Bible. How do people find this? Can people go online pretty easily and read it and like follow along?
I mean, if we even post it in the links, Tacitus, Josephus, Pliny, Lucian, all kinds of Suetonius, and you just plug it. If you just even Googled Pliny and Jesus or Josephus and Jesus, you'll see the quotes right there.
And these people did they have an incentive to
no.
make him look good?
No,
or
not at all.
Was it just factual? Like, this
No,
is just what
see, they were
happened?
writing books that were talking about like Roman history, or they were talking about a large thing that they were more interested in, like what does Caesar Augustus say about this or that or whatever. And then it was kind of like these
Almost like
side
a
little
footnote
things.
thing. Okay.
Yeah. So that's super fascinating when you think it. So again, if anybody's going to say that this was something that was concocted 400 or 500 years after Jesus, right off the bat, you're wrong. Okay. Now you've got followers of Jesus like Clement. You have some of these early Christians. I'm trying to think, was it Ignatius? No, Irenaeus, and he's about 150. Who the whole scope of like about 40 years after Jesus, all the way up to about 150 years, about 100 years after Jesus, there are these followers of him that write stuff that show familiarity with his material. So, like for example, about 40 years after Jesus rose from the dead, we have something called the Didache. And the Didache is like a manual for how to do church. So it's fascinating to think like, this is how you worship. This is what you should do about baptism. I mean, it's basically like manuals for how to conduct yourself as Christians in a church setting. So what's the first thing you think of? It's like, well, what about all these YouTube videos out there? I'd be like, well, this was changed by like the Catholic Church there wasn't the Catholic Church yet. You know what I mean? And we've got this material that shows us 40 years after the resurrection, they're referring to material from the Sermon on the Mount. That's intense. I mean, you think Jesus, died and rose again in the 30s. Paul writes his earliest writings like in the 50s. We think that Mark was probably the 50s. We think that Matthew and Luke were 60s, 70s. John was somewhere around 90.
And John, doesn't he even reference in like 1 Corinthians text that was actually earlier?
Yeah.
That actually would have been like almost like within the decade of Jesus
Yeah.
going to the cross.
Yeah, good point. And
like the creed. Or
not I was gonna say there's not only that, but he quotes like poems or songs that were chanted by early Christians.
Oh wow.
That are formulaic, like he died and rose again, like that sort of thing, which shows years and years of formulaic type of attention to like a creed or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating. You can go right now. Okay, so this is cool. You can go to a guy named Irenaeus. Okay, this guy Irenaeus, his teacher was a guy named Polycarp. I know names are weird, but just go with it.
So good.
Someone's middle name.
Yeah.
Next
Somebody
couple
out there,
years for sure.
Kid,
Yeah.
go for it.
He
It's coming back.
got a lot of fish. I don't know, but so you
I
got
was thinking
Polycarp.
Pokemon, but that's all right.
Are you serious?
Yeah, man.
That's bad.
Poliwag, anybody?
You
Pokemon?
should not admit that. You got to go with the fishing analogy first.
I got to stay true to who I am,
That's
right?
true. That's true. That's true. Was there a Pokemon named
I think
Polycarp?
Poliwag. See, the limitation of my
Snorlax
knowledge is the
really is
original 151, but I digress. Okay, there's too many.
What is
of
the
them now.
original 150? Oh, it's the
That was
original
the
number?
first 151 Pokemon,
Okay.
and then they made like millions, and I can't remember any of the others.
They
But
got a hand.
Poliwag,
Should
I
we-
remember, and that's what came
Should
into
we
mind.
do a podcast on the original?
Yeah, episode 7 is gonna be about Pokemon.
Is
So
that
we'll get to that.
CE or
Oh,
BCE?
my mom banned it from my house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened.
So if you want to go back, pulling us back, if you want to go back and actually look at, you can actually Google this right now, Irenaeus, 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 and John the disciple. And what you find, he actually, and part of it is against heresies, he has his little side note. He says, I remember, and I'm going to totally paraphrase this. I'm going to simplify this. This isn't quote, word for word. I remember when Polycarp would talk about John and how John would come in and talk about the Lord and all the things that he'd done. Like in the context of like miracles, rising the dead, all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
Now think about that. It's like the great, would it be the great-grandson? The great-grandson of Jesus' inner teaching.
That's cool.
Who's talking about John just beaming, talking about the Lord.
Wow.
So if anybody wants to say like, well, we don't know if Jesus really existed. This was he had a girlfriend. He was an alien, like all that stuff. All you got to do is go back to Irenaeus, who talks about Polycarp talking about John, about the Lord.
Wow.
That's insane.
Wow. So we have historians, we have other followers of Jesus that weren't necessarily in the canon of Scripture, but talked about him. Were any of these other anything else talking about his divinity or what he claimed to be, or was it all just like that he existed?
Yeah. So if anybody ever wants to really deep dive on this, Wesley Huff does a lot of really great stuff. He's come to prominence recently with the Joe Rogan interview, and he does a great job. I mean, he's a total expert, 190,000 times more than I am in any of these areas, because he specializes in like the glosses on ancient texts and like what are added, what's not added. And he talks about this. This is really cool. He brings up slides, and we're not as cool as he is, so we don't have slides. But he brings up these slides. Yeah, he brings up these slides that show ancient graffiti. And there's this one graffiti slide of someone who is they're like making fun of this other guy who's a Christian. And I forget what he said his name was, like, I don't know, we'll say Josephus or whatever. No, that would be more Jewish, but Malcolm. Malcolm worshiping his God. That's the title of it. And you see this person hanging on a cross with a donkey head, which is so awesome. I mean, it's like total seventh grade. You know what I mean? But he brings up these types of graffiti that are all throughout the ancient Near East that show people reacting to Jesus. And so obviously it's a depiction of Jesus on the cross. And this is very early. So again, anybody out there who gets nervous about the videos out there, the YouTube videos, or friends like, yeah, well, I heard that Jesus was just a whole lot of stuff that was invented and whatever. It's a total lie. I mean, we have firsthand evidence of how people reacted to who Jesus was. And that's a great one too. I love that.
It's alarming how often I've seen videos like that, that they give this full, thorough explanation of something. And you could just Google like the title of the video and just type debunked. And sometimes you'll just see articles that just say like, this is, sometimes you don't have to go any further and you'll see like, this is just blatantly not true.
Yeah.
Which is dangerous, because if you don't have any of that context, you're going to start believing stuff that has already been disproven.
Right. Right.
So what else, Josh? Is there anything else for you that's been encouraging outside of the Bible about who Jesus was, or that he existed, or did we hit all the main points at this point?
You touched on a lot of them. I mean, I think that time gap is so crucial, right? Like there are so many, and John, you probably speak to this, so many historical works we look at with massive time gaps, and we don't really question their validity. But if you have, again, people talking about Jesus within the decade, within 30 years, 40 years, all saying kind of the same thing, like that just even historically is unheard of, I think, in a lot of ways.
And it's fascinating. And I don't want to cut you off.
No, keep going.
So one of the coolest things, I bring this up all the time, N.T. Wright has this like 700-page book called The Resurrection of the Son of God that nobody reads, but like I slogged my way through it. And there is at least like 300 pages on the development of this idea of the resurrection. And in the resurrection, as we talk about the resurrection, and we've talked about this before, we talk about yastemi or histemi, which is related to a word anastasis, which means like to rise again, and how the disciples just didn't understand what this was. And what he does, he traces the development all the way back through like 3500 BC, all the way up through like 100 AD. And it's almost, you ever put in like a word in Google search and it shows you the etymology of it? I'm not the only one. Awesome.
Yeah,
so you put it in, right? And it shows like word usage over and like, give me a word. What's
And
the-
there's like you can use apps. Logos is one that you can use for like to look up tons of stuff around words in the
Yeah.
Bible. It gives you so much
well, not
history
even just
on
words
it,
in the
how it's
Bible. Not even
used,
just
and-
words in the Bible. I'm just talking like if you bring up what's an uncommon word? Just give me something.
Oh man,
Knee jerk,
Superfluous.
or
Ooh.
like knee jerk reaction, or superfluous, or just something that has a little bit more of a rise and fall over time.
Mhm.
It will plot out the
Mm.
use of the
Mm.
word. It came to use in the 1600s, and then it trailed off, or
Mm.
something like that.
Mm.
Herky jerky. You know, I mean, you could really put in
it might come back now.
etymology,
That's a little bump.
etymology
Yeah.
of herky jerky.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it'll say, well, it came from this time, and it'll show on a graph how it like
Mm.
rose to
wow.
prominence, whatever. So anyhow, the reason why I'm setting this up, and if you want to do that right now on Google and listen to me kind of out of the corner of your ear, go ahead and do that because it's really cool.
Mm.
But what he does is he goes and he looks at this word histemi, or to rise again, resurrection.
Mm.
And through the ancient world, it is like zero flat line. 3,500, 2,000, 1,500, 1,000, completely flat. And so the problem is, it's like, well, wait, didn't they believe in the afterlife? I mean, I thought they believed in ghosts, apparitions, like the afterlife. Like Egyptians, they put stuff in their tombs for the afterlife, And so N.T. Wright goes on to explain, well, yeah, they had ideas of ghosts and the afterlife and apparitions and spirits and all that,
Mhm.
right? But this idea of someone rising from the dead was unknown to them until 50 AD.
Mm.
If you look at all the uses in literature, it skyrockets
Wow.
in
Mm.
50 AD. And it's usually, and this is what Wright says, he says it's usually within Greek literature and women's trashy novels. Like when you go to the beach and you're like, hot romance. A lot of the cases of this use of this word of histemi had to do with a man who loves a woman, and then some kind of problem arises where he's like, I'm going to be killed, but he says, but I will histemi, I will rise again.
Mm.
Come meet me at the tomb on the third day. And it all comes to prominence right around 50 AD. At exactly the same time the disciples are preaching
Wow.
about the resurrection.
Wow. So the significance of this
Yeah.
is that if we go to Jesus and we're going to get into in a moment kind of what the Bible says about who he is, who does he claim to be, all that. But what you're saying is that this word, not just in the Bible, but in general, kind of just got really, really popular.
Amped up. So
After-
just happened to be.
Yeah. After Jesus resurrected,
Yeah.
now suddenly this word is just making prominence all
Isn't that
over the place.
fascinating?
That is really cool. That's really cool. I did not know
So
that. That's awesome.
there's that. Do you want us to go on some more? Because we can keep going.
Is it related to words like that?
No.
Share something else, because
Just let it
right
go.
now we're sticking on like things outside of the
I got
Bible. We'll get
so
to the Bible,
much
but
for you. I
yeah,
got
tell me something else.
outside the Bible. Okay, so
I'm loving it.
if we look at early historians and also religious people within Judaism
Mm.
who are talking about Meshiach, who are talking about Messiah, they were the experts on Messiah. Okay, and so when they got amped about Messiah, obviously there are prophecies in the Old Testament talking about Messiah being this conquering king. And again, just so everybody knows, a Messiah is an anointed one. It's like a special agent, somebody who's given a specific task by God to accomplish a specific purpose. To anoint somebody is to like set them up either as a prophet, a priest, or a king. Okay, like so that's the point of what
Is that
Messiah
like
was.
the character in Dune?
Yeah,
Didn't they call him the Messiah? Wasn't
Yes.
that what his-
Timothy Chalamet.
There we go.
great movies. Yeah, I want my Messiah a little bit more bulky.
Yeah, it's
a little scrawny.
a little
Yeah.
slim.
A
Yeah,
little bit. Little what?
a little slim.
Well, there's a little swim. So anyhow, where were we? So when we talk about Messiah, then again, the Jews were experts at what this anointed special agent of God was, right? And there were actually many messiahs. Jesus wasn't the only one. Now I'm saying that not in a theological way.
Right.
Okay, so don't anybody. That's a horrible clip for someone to be like,
comments. Yes.
"We believe there are many messiahs." Okay, so no, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that there was like Tacitus. He was in the 40s. There's this guy who calls himself the Egyptian. It's kind of like Prince, like the artist formerly known as the Egyptian. But he just calls himself the Egyptian. And he sets up this whole cult around him where he's just like, I am the Messiah.
Wow.
And he forecasts that he will go and he will free the Jews from the tyranny of Rome and he will disappear. Well, the truth is he actually led a bunch of people and then did disappear. Like he just took off and was
Wow.
done.
Wow.
Tacitus, the guy I talked about before in the 40s, they cut off his head. There's a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba, okay? And he came by between 132 and 135. He was the most successful Messiah. He actually defeated the Romans and secured Jerusalem for 3 years.
Wow.
I mean, he printed coins. I mean, to beat the Romans? Like,
Was this
amazing.
like war? Like
Yeah.
battle? Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah.
like this was like a physical
Oh,
battle.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is like, I'm going to run a spear through your eye socket.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
that's
people probably picture Jesus to be doing something similar, right? Like to
Sorta.
have some kind of.
Was
Yeah.
this before Jesus too?
this is after 132.
Oh, this is after. Oh,
132 to
okay.
But this is
135.
what they were hoping for.
These
They're
are
hoping
all
Jesus was the-
messiahs. Yeah,
Okay.
these are all like in the history of messiahs. These, and it's funny because you guys are asking me about how come we don't hear about them.
Yeah.
Why do we hear about Jesus? He was the least successful Messiah militarily. So what makes him stand out?
Yeah, this traveling rabbi. that
Yeah.
just shows
Why
up.
why are we
Yeah.
listening to them? Why are we dividing our dates by this guy who failed? Now, this is what's crazy. Okay, so on that merit alone, that we pay attention to Jesus for some reason, and I believe it's because of the resurrection. Okay, like we don't pay attention to these other people because they failed. The guy got his head chopped off, right? Our messiahs are getting their heads chopped off. Do you get that quote? Do you
No,
get that quote?
I don't.
Absolutely. Dumb and Dumber, dude.
Yeah, come on.
I'm not cultured enough. Okay, I'm trying to
It's
keep
Dumb and
up here.
Dumber. There's more Dumb and Dumber and theology.
Listen, I grew up in a Christian home. I wasn't allowed to put that on my TV, man. Like I'm growing up with Veggie Tales.
Are getting their heads cut off.
So good.
All right. Anyhow, oh my gosh, I feel like my life is complete.
So you got someone
This
to
is
catch your
it. This is
references.
it.
There we
I
go.
got you, John.
I have finally related Dumb and Dumber to theology. I don't know how I did it. Anyhow, that's a miracle in itself. So, having said that, though, the Talmud, there's two forms of it, like the Babylonian Talmud, and then there's like the Tosefta and a whole bunch of these different writings that can incorporate into something called the Talmud. And so the Talmud is like a Jewish commentary. It's not equal with the law, but it's like one of the more religious books on Judaism, in Judaism. And so it's a lot of commentary on like what has happened. And so what's fascinating is that there are parts of the Talmud, and again, we're talking like 3rd century AD, not CE. They talk about Jesus as a Messiah, and they talk about other Messiahs. Now, this is crazy. This can make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. They talk about Jesus, and they talk about these other Messiahs. When they talk about the other Messiahs failed. They didn't win their military campaigns. When they talk about Jesus, he failed. But they describe him as a worker of wonders, that he did miracles. They can't argue with it,
Wow.
but they attribute it to demons and Satan. Isn't that fascinating?
Wow.
Think about that. Your enemy, at that point, the Jews were
Yeah, they would have
enemies.
every reason to not want to
Totally.
like lift him up on a pedestal,
Right.
Because he was subversive
Right.
for the Jews. Yeah.
And so credit the Jews that were writing in the Talmud, they were being honest. They're like, we can't argue with the fact that he did something miraculous. We can't argue with his wonder-working power, but we can kind of throw some doubt into where it came from.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
And we're assuming, did they reference the resurrection, or are they just kind of referencing miracles in general? Okay.
Yeah, just the miracles.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
That is really cool.
Now, add to that, no, that's on the Jewish side of it.
Mhm.
Now, let's talk about the Roman side of it. Now, think about this for a minute. If you ever get a chance to do like Roman history, Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, but Tom Holland.
You knew where I was going to go.
I was preempting
Very
it.
predictable.
Oh, man. So Tom Holland is a historian. He wrote this book. Now I'm not going to remember the title of it, but it was about Rome. And it's on the tip of my tongue. It'll come. But basically, he's talking about Rome. And what's fascinating is Tom Holland was not a Christian, is not a Christian, as we would count, following Jesus. But when he finished all of his research and when he wrote the initial copy of it, he said, I never realized how much of a Christian I was.
Wow.
Because when he looked at ancient Rome was savage, like brutal savage. And not just their troops, not just Augustus. Like it was like, if someone were to say to you, oh, I feel weak today, I feel like I need to lean on someone. It was kind of like Roman culture context to say, how can I take advantage of this? How can I exploit this?
Expected.
Wow.
Yeah. And so when you think of how they handled widows, how they handled the poor, how they handled people that are marginalized in Roman culture. It was savage. I mean, it was horrible. There were no safety nets. There was no welfare. If you had family that was connected, that's how you were helped out later in life. That was it. When on the 8th day of a child being born, he was brought and laid at the feet of the father. It was called pater potestas. And they would lay down the child, and the father would look down on the child, and if he approved, the child was picked up and taken home. If he disapproved and turned away, they took the child out to the wilderness and let it die.
Wow.
And a lot of times they would do that if it was a female. They just wanted males. And so what's fascinating, and this, okay, if the question is, how do we know outside the Bible that Jesus was really who he was? Okay. And if we're even divorcing ourselves from historians and early writings and stuff like that, we've got to, it's almost like we've got to understand the seismic shift that happened within culture and within the world. Remember, Rome is bitter cruel, you know what I mean? Just like savage. It was the Christians that followed when the servants took the baby out to the wilderness to die. They would follow from a distance, wait for the servants to leave, and go scoop up that baby and raise it.
Wow.
The first orphanages were Christian. First hospitals, Christian.
Wow.
The first care, welfare systems, all Christian. So when you have, during the time of Jesus, you have no welfare, you have no care for widows, no care for the marginalized, infanticide, the emperor was a god, the cross was a crucifixion symbol, all these things. John Mark Comer does a really good treatment of this in his book, Live No Lies. Remember that book?
Yeah. That's great.
Really great book. But he summarizes the difference between pre and post-Christian Rome. When Christianity took off in Rome, now you're talking like 200-300 years later, what do we see? Complete opposite of that. The cross becomes a salvation symbol. The king becomes a tool of God. No longer infanticide. You have orphanages. Widows are taken care of. The poor are lifted up. This whole idea of sacrifice. Now, this is the thing. For Jesus to say, like, I'm going to sacrifice myself for the sins of all humanity, the Romans would have looked down on that. They would have said, like, oh,
Weakness.
yeah, exactly. So you get my point.
Yep.
Now, 200-300 years later, it's completely flipped.
Yeah.
The whole idea of sacrifice is love and commitment. A man has no greater, help me out with no greater love as a man.
Yeah, man has no greater love than to lay down his life for his friends.
Yeah. That a Roman would have laughed at. 300 years later, Romans are quoting it.
And we forget too, because in our culture now, and that's not that it's as good as what Jesus is sharing, right? But we also would look at widows and orphans and be like, oh yeah, we should take care of people. Oh, yeah, we should take care of the poor. There's like that sense, that compass of the moral compass, a little bit more naturally, where it would not have been there back then.
100%.
So this would have been very obvious that someone affected that culture.
Bro, think
and
about
that happened right around Jesus.
I mean, not to get all political or anything. I'm not going to get political here. Everybody goes, whoa, what are we talking about?
Turn off the mic.
No, but we very much today, and this is beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but very much today, we enjoy the benefits of the kingdom of God, but not wanting the king. That Jesus brought these ideas to us, and we're all about like, man, we ought to include people, we ought to love people, lift them up. Hey, if that guy's lagging behind, we don't leave him. We go and get, that's all Jesus. That's the effect of Jesus on our culture. So was he real? You know, you can't escape the effect of Jesus in our culture.
It gives me like more compassion sometimes for the people who hear his like Jesus's words and his message is hard to hear now, right? And to go and do the things he said. But in that culture, man, having that perspective, that's the water they're swimming in. Like it gives me grace for them when it's like you read so many times, like oh, they just don't get it. But it's like if that's all you're used to, how could you? You've never had somebody show you that there's a whole different way to do life.
Right. Yeah. Today we'd see care for widows and orphans and be like, of course I should.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we are, but we would agree with the sense that we should.
And in some ways we flipped it around where we're like, hey, we shouldn't care for these people. They ought to pay taxes or whatever. And again, we don't want to get political and all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of like we need to reclaim our roots in some ways to be like, hey, the kingdom comes from the king.
Yeah. So this is great stuff just outside of the Bible.
Yeah.
Let's just say, hey, it's
Lots
very, very clear that Jesus was a real person. He walked the earth.
You can't get away from it.
He was teaching something that caused a big ripple effect in the culture. And we see that in history outside of the Bible. And so I'm also interested now to look inside the Bible and say, okay, that's showing us what happened, the effect of him existing, but what did he actually claim to be? Who did he actually claim to be? And we really get that inside the Bible. And so maybe we dive into that a little bit. And Josh, if you want to jump in this one first, like what is what do we see in the Bible? Who is Jesus claiming to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, we can look at verses for sure, but I think like the biggest point of evidence for this is like the thing that led him to the cross was blasphemy. It was the fact that he claimed to be God or equal with God.
Mm.
And so like if you don't have any claims already for that, it's like he doesn't even get to the cross, right? But he said a ton of things to indicate that he was God. Hey, me and the Father are one. He forgave sins. Like you can't be forgiven sins if you're not God. Like just making stuff up, right? All these things. He's before Abraham was, I am. Stuff that
That's
they would have
trippy.
known right away.
I love that.
That's
Is it
just
John
like
8 or something.
You were asking the wrong guy, man.
It's
I couldn't say
beautiful.
Tacitus earlier, so you're asking but like all these things, especially that last one, that would have like just made their radar go off of like this dude is claiming to be God.
Yeah.
And
that one, the I am, he's using the same word as when God referred to himself, right?
God talking to Moses, saying, hey, before Abraham was,
so it was they would have known that, and that would have been a pretty significant claim.
It wouldn't,
I
it
believe
wouldn't
they
have
tried
been
to
the
stone
same
him.
word, but
I think they, if I remember, I think that's when they try to stone him, like immediately after he says that. And he gets away.
I mean, he's invoking the same idea, but got to be real specific for the bean counters out there.
Absolutely. That's what you're here for.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's awesome. And any others, John, if you want to like fill in on this too. What else? I think we're talking about Jesus. Jesus is God. I mean, that's in the title of the question. Is Jesus, did he exist? And he was he 100% man and God, all that. So how do we know that's what he claimed? Are there other verses we can pull out? Or is there other evidence in the Bible we can point to that, or on the flip side, what's the argument against that? It's probably a better question. Like, what's the argument? Do people look in the Bible and say, no, he didn't really claim to be God? Like, is that also pushback that we get?
Yeah, I don't think you can't get around it. The reason he was sent to the cross was because of his, not just his claims to divinity, but, how he was affecting their ability to monopolize the people, that like, man, we're going to get in trouble with Rome because they're going to be upset with us because he's redefining what it means to follow God, And it's not a ritual. It's not a bunch of rules. It actually is more about a relationship with God mediated through the person of Jesus.
And that's like the perfect storm to take them off too, right? Because it's like, you have a guy who's claiming to be God. He's like completely saying something that's different from a lot of the stuff you're saying. He's calling you out, which you don't like. And then he's doing all these miracles on top of that, which like, I mean, goodness.
So what I have here actually, because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm just, I put in a search here for where did Jesus say he was God? John 10, verse 30. He goes, I and the Father are one. I think you mentioned it before. I don't know if you get much clearer than that. John 14:9, he tells Philip, he goes, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. That's
pretty clear.
That's up there. John 8, you notice John is really interested in this a lot. That's the one. That was John 8. Before Abraham was, I am, which is so trippy. I mean, it's like past, present.
Full circle.
So cool. Mark, getting out of the book of John, Mark chapter 14, during the trial, he is asked by the high priest, if he's the Messiah, and he goes, I am. Dude.
Just right to it.
And it's
Check
not,
yes, check
and
no.
again, it's that play off of the phrase, or that Yahweh phrase, and in Greek it would have been Amy. I don't know what it is in Aramaic. But he's definitely double counting things here.
Is that Messiah? Because we did talk about Messiah meaning something.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily divinity earlier. Is that one different? Like, is that?
He's being asked by the high priest, which by the way is against the law. Okay.
Oh wow.
The high priest can't interrogate, and Jesus tries to remind the high priest, "Hey, why don't you ask those who saw me?" He's not being smart. He's saying, "Why don't you remember parliamentary procedure?" And he gets whacked for it.
Wow.
So fascinating stuff. Great book for that, by the way, is John MacArthur's The Murder of Jesus. Great book. Shows how the entire thing was a sham of justice. But anyhow, to answer your question, it was by the high priest who would have been much more open to the idea of angels, demons, afterlife. And because of that, he would have seen Messiah as somebody who came to inaugurate a messianic age. So to answer your question, yes.
Yeah.
Matthew 28, he says, all authority has been given to me on heaven and earth. And so that is as a watch phrase, it's kind of like, okay, well then he is divine. Thomas's declaration in John chapter 20, where he says, my Lord and my God. And Jesus doesn't go, no. He accepts it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some great passages there that just show that Jesus was like, yep.
Yeah. That's cool. So the claim of divinity is clear.
Pretty clear.
Right?
Yeah.
We see Jesus is real. We get into the Bible and he is saying, hey, I am God. That's who I am. That's what I've come to do. So what about some of the other things about Jesus? Let's talk about like miracles, for example. Do you have to believe that all the miracles literally really happened to follow Jesus? Is that important as well?
I don't see. I mean, like for me,
Oh,
that's just such a
1,000%.
small step.
Mm.
After you've like, if you accepted the fact that
Yeah, he's God.
Mhm.
Jesus
Like,
came, he's God incarnate, then what are miracles? I don't understand. Help me understand. Like, what would make somebody feel like, I don't know if I can go that far.
Mhm.
5,000 people eating fish and bread. Like, what would be the stumbling block there?
Mhm.
I feel you'd almost have to have trouble with the divinity thing as a
Yeah.
whole for that to
Yeah.
be a problem. Because
Yeah.
I feel like if you're arriving at, I'm seeing Jesus as God, it's really hard to imagine that
Yeah.
he couldn't
Yep.
do the miracles that he did in
Yeah.
the Bible.
And it's especially Jesus. Now, I can see people going like this, saying like, well, in the Bible, there's all these like stories of people hearing from God, and God does these amazing things. And it's like once a day, God's doing something amazing. And we know it's a bunch of stories because that doesn't happen today. But if you actually look at and plot out, like in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, the number of times that God does something that's miraculous, there are some times where it's decades, if not hundreds of years before stuff happens in between. And if you were to take 100 random people today, and if you were to follow their line for the next like 200 years and ask, were there any times that anything miraculous has happened where God's done something, God spoke to you, whatever, you're going to get a couple dozen responses back that are genuine. And so when we look at scripture and we discount scripture because we think, oh, it's just a bunch of like stories that people made up and it's all a bunch of miracles because everybody's having a miracle a week. That's not the case. And in fact, even Paul, if you remember at the end of his ministry, he's just like, I prayed 3 times that God would deliver me from this, and he didn't.
Mhm.
Here's a guy who saw the risen Jesus and is just praying, can you heal my eye? Or whatever it is that's
Yeah.
the thorn in his flesh. And God won't take it away. And if you start plotting out the number of times something miraculous happens in his life, it's not every day. It's not every week. Sometimes it's months, years apart. I mean, you think he saw Jesus, right? Changed his life. And isn't it Galatians that says it was like 14 years later he went someplace else? I mean, what happened in those 14 years?
Yeah.
It's a big gap.
Yep.
So don't think,
Mm.
anybody listening to this, don't think, well, the Bible, that's when God really moved. And he doesn't move in my life today. It's like, give him time. The interval of a miraculous occurrence isn't quite as much as we think it is.
Yeah.
Or it's greater than we think it is.
Isn't it like 400 years from the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi before?
Intertestamental period.
Yeah.
And
Wow. That's
yet,
crazy
and
to think
yet,
about.
and yet, God was doing stuff.
Mm.
I mean, that's when the Hebrews talk about in the book of Maccabees about Hanukkah. And then they say that, God helped the oil last for 8 days. Who are we to say? Maybe God did work in that, but it's just not recorded. And so there you have something that happened that was about 165, 200 BC, something like that. BC.
Yeah.
BC.
So there's almost like a building blocks to arrive at this stuff, right? Because if you're going to believe in miracles, maybe maybe that could even happen before you start believing the divinity claim. Maybe we have like in verse, like you might believe he's a good teacher. Maybe he could have done some crazy shenanigans, but was he really God? So maybe
Yeah.
that's the order. Because if you believe he's God, you probably believe.
But
he
still,
can do
I'm a
miracles.
skeptic on it. And we'll come to this later, but I'm a total skeptic on all this. Because, I mean, like,
A
I
skeptic
think-
on what?
No, I'm a skeptic on people like, well, if I had this proof, then I would believe. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. That's baloney, and it's a game. And I call people on all the time. It's either some people unknowingly do it, but I think there's a lot of people that hedge their doubt by saying, well, if I had seen this, then I would. And they set up an impossible claim and say, well, if I see God do something, if God came down in front of me and said tonight, you got to do this, then I would believe. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. So we'll get into that.
I mean, now I'm getting ready to go down that trail. But before we go there, what other nuggets are there? Okay, so we're talking about Jesus, miracles, all that stuff. What about? I know there's a lot of prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus supposedly fulfilled.
Yeah.
How do we know that he fulfilled them? How did we figure that out? And maybe just riff on the prophecies for a minute.
Dude, this is what did it for me. I remember wrestling with all this stuff senior year of high school, and like meeting the right people to be like, man, their faith's different than mine. I gotta like wake my faith up, and I have a faith that's not my parents. Like all those things. And then I remember getting to some of the, believe it or not, was like mathematics and like the improbability of somebody just stumbling their way through these biblical like prophecies.
Oh, I thought you were reading the prophecies in mathematics.
No,
Like,
and I'm not a math
I'm
kid.
not even paying attention.
Yeah, no. I
Just a
probably should've.
sidebar, yeah.
Definitely not a math kid. I was like the kid that, man, dude, algebra, like as soon as you start adding letters in math, you're like, what are we doing? I
They
need
don't belong
geometry.
there.
I need
honestly.
pictures. You know, I was like, I need pictures.
I was a
Um,
whiz at math.
I am not surprised, honestly,
Not
if
at
you
all.
were.
Not at all. I was making up new math.
You're the guy
I
who
actually
created the
did.
math they have today.
No,
You
listen.
created
I
it?
remember Mrs. Tacitus in geometry. I'm like, yeah, I think I figured this out. No, I like made up a new proof.
Did you get to
And
the
she
right
looked
answer?
at me. She's like, "Why are you? No, that's wrong." she had this pained look on her face, like she wanted to go home and just stop teaching. You know?
I have
She's like,
failed.
"Why are you doing that?"
The
And
reason
she's
she
like,
quit.
"Just follow what I'm teaching you." And I'm like, "Yeah, but this works." She's like, "No, it doesn't. No, in no way does this work."
You heard it here first. John invented Common Core math. That's what
Yeah, there you
that's
go.
what actually happened.
Exactly.
There you go.
Like today, they would have been like, "Good try, good effort, good effort."
But yeah, I remember, goodness, like going through some of this content, and I mean, you might know the specifics, John, but Old Testament, the Bible's awesome, right? It's setting up this big story that's leading to Jesus, and so sprinkled throughout the Old Testament, it's talking about, all right, the Messiah, like Jesus, God's Son who comes here to save us. He's going to do all these things, and it's kind of like sprinkling what to look for. And so some of this is like, most of it's probably stuff you can't control. Like, all right, he's going to be born of a virgin. He's going to be born in Bethlehem. Like tribe of Judah. He's going to be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, I think is one. Ton of stuff outside of his control. He wouldn't have even been able to like manipulate, even if he was like really, really like up to date on what he wanted to do and like kind of make it look like he was the Messiah. And so there are dozens of these things that Jesus did fulfill in the New Testament. But what actually was like the tipping point for me, and it's funny that it's math, because again, I hate math, man. But it's just some way that God got to my soul, was just, there's a book that Josh McDowell wrote. It's called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And he had a mathematician there, and he wanted to find out, like, hey, what's the probability of Jesus stumbling into some of these things? Like, is there a chance some guy could like
Just randomly got
be
crucified.
like,
Yeah.
hey, it's Jesus, and he happened to hit all these checks in the boxes, and maybe wasn't the Son of God.
Right.
And he has this mathematician that helped him do it. I think it was like Peter Stoner was his name. And he's like, let's just start with 8 of them. Like, there's dozens and dozens, but let's start with 8. He randomly selected 8. And dude, the number's absurd. It's like, all right, the chances of this happening is a 1 followed by 17 zeros. I think I wrote it down, a 100 quadrillion, I think is what ChatGPT told me it
Wow.
was.
That's not a made up word.
Not a made up word. I know, that's almost like you went to your kid, like,
It's like
make
a
make up
zillion.
My
numbers.
son Dallas makes up big words, and
Print
that sounds
Monopoly
like
money.
one.
It's the equivalent of
100
that.
gazillion.
But so thankfully, the visual part of this, right? Math, you're like, what does that even mean, right? The mathematician helped him, like, all right, here's like a visual to explain what this would be like.
Wow.
He's like, all right, picture you rent out the state of Texas. You get your buddy, you rent out the state of Texas for a day, and you fill it up 2 feet high with silver dollars. If you're listening and you're like under 21, silver dollars are like before Venmo. It's like a bigger quarter, right?
Yeah.
And so you fill it up to 2 feet tall, and then you get a Sharpie, put an X on one, stir it up, put it in the state, and then you get your friend. You're like, all right, dude, this is what we're doing today. In the state of Texas, I've hidden the 1 silver dollar with the X on it. I'm going to blindfold you, go find it. And it would be like the first try of finding
The very first try.
And that's just 8 of those. Like, man, there are dozens and dozens of these things. And again, for whatever reason, for me, that was the thing where it's like, okay, I can either believe he's the Son of God, and God is telling this story from the beginning of time that's leading up to who Jesus is, or I can choose just to look the other way at this.
Yeah.
And that for me, along with all this other stuff God was doing in my heart, was enough to be like,
Yeah.
all right, this is my faith. Jesus is who he said he is.
Wow.
I may as well believe it, as opposed to thinking that, all right, like me
That's
and my friend can
powerful.
go find
That's
this
so cool.
Yeah, that
silver
is
dollar in
powerful.
Texas. kind
That's
of
a
thing.
huge number.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absurd.
That's almost as much as how much the Eagles beat the Chiefs by in the Super Bowl.
Oh, man.
Almost.
Almost.
Yeah. It's huge.
Now, my brother's a big Kansas State Chiefs fan, and it was a very sad day for him.
Oh, it was a beautiful day.
It was,
And you got to nurse it as much as you can as an Eagles fan because you don't know when it's going to happen again.
So, John, anything else on prophecies? Like any other pieces of that, or maybe some other nuggets you want to?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned all the big significant ones. We talked about the ones before when we were talking about the reliability of the Bible. So you should go back and watch that podcast if you haven't seen that. But when you think that God is sending a message saying, look for this Messiah, this secret agent, the person that I have deputized to come in and redeem all of humanity, and you go to Isaiah 53, you go to Psalm 22, and we talked about this before, where they Psalm 22 talks about they've pierced my hands and feet.
Mm.
Okay. And now, interesting to note, there are a couple different notes on that word, ka'ari and ka'aru. So ka'ari and ka'aru sound very close to each other. And so they're not sure whether that means they have pierced my hands and feet or whether, like a lion, my hands and feet.
Mm.
But even lions' paws get attached to a pole when they're pulled out of the forest, okay, or out of the wilderness. So either way, it still works for crucifixion. They stare at me, they gloat at me, they cast lots for my clothing. All of the description of Psalm 22 is of someone being crucified. And they've been cardiologists that go through that, and they're like, this is exactly what happens. Your bones come out of joint, your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth. All of those things happen. Things he couldn't even control, people casting lots for his garments. Now, here's the thing. That was written in 1000 BC. Crucifixion wasn't invented yet.
Yeah.
So everybody reading that would have been like, wow.
That's weird.
What's up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, Isaiah 53 has the same thing of stripes. He took stripes. I'm like, I'm such a contextual, I just think of the big picture, but by his wounds we were healed. There we go. I got something out of it. But again, that's hundreds of years before Jesus. To me, I don't know how you can look at that and not be affected by it. Now, again, if we compare this with other religions, if we compare this with other religious literature, and not to bash any other religions, honestly, I'll be honest with you, and don't take this out of context, but I think there's a lot of wisdom we can learn from Buddhism. I think Christians especially can learn how to just calm down, not just be more in the moment and not worry about everything. I believe that Hinduism has a lot of creative solutions to community, how to solve problems within community. When you look at the Mahayana, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, all of these particular tomes, in Buddhism, it's a Tripitaka. There's a lot of great wisdom we can learn from Confucius, the rest of it. Okay, so again, I'm not bashing religions, but what I am saying is that no one's going to look at the Mahayana in Hinduism and they're going to say, well, that's history. No one's going to say Lakshmi and Sita and Rama, they all jumped on the back of this one monkey and jumped over to the monkey kingdom. They're not going to say that happened in history. They're going to say, no, it's kind of like a picture. It's an analogy. It's a metaphor. So when we look at the uniqueness of prophecy, how among all the world's religions, how different it is that it actually happened in time. Okay. Yeah. It happened to a person in time. When the Buddha was in his Siddhartha Gautama, he's gathered with his disciples, his last night on earth. He's having dinner. And it's not like the Last Supper. It's not like, I'm about to die. He just looks at them and goes, hey, when I die, don't make me into a god. Okay? Because we have enough of those illusions. And then he goes, falls face forward into his rice. They think he might have been poisoned. Wow. Fascinating. Wow. So those were his last words. Jesus didn't have just last words. He had hundreds of years of words preceding him, forecasting what he's going to do. Yeah. That's what makes it unique. So when we talk about prophecy, we're not just talking about everybody has prophecy. No, they don't. They really don't. And they'll admit to it. No, we don't have it. That's unique about the Hebrew scriptures that read into New Testament.
That's awesome. So we're really stacking up just evidence, right, of in the Bible that just points to Jesus. It's impossible to find that silver dollar in Texas. I mean, it's just no way. Maybe another piece of this, another block to this could be even thinking about the disciples. So here are these followers of Jesus. So you have people who were right there with him, learning from him. And then after he died and was crucified, what I've heard is the part that I know is that they all went off and eventually died for their beliefs. But then there's also that argument that there's actually been some other kind of crazy people that have died for cult followers. And, what can we pull from the disciples' life that just gives us additional evidence? No, this was, really abnormal that they believed this or did this. Is there any more pieces to that?
I think putting yourself in their shoes, probably the differentiators, I agree with you. People will say all the time, well, they died for their beliefs. It's dude, we see that all the time, right? Some of the worst things in history that have happened have been people who died for their beliefs and took a ton of people with them, right? But I think what's different with the disciples is, I think, man, they would have had to believe their own delusion if they were setting this up that Jesus rose from the dead and he actually didn't.
Hmm.
Because they clearly went to their graves. They clearly like intuitively believed this thing. And so in my mind, it's like, all right, it either happened or they got themselves so deluded with the fact that like, hey, we set it up to look like this happened and like took that to the grave. It's like, I don't know how you dilute yourself that much if you're the one that's like, hey, we're making it look like Jesus rose from the dead, but he actually didn't. And I'm just believing my own lie here. I think most within human nature, if we know something's not true or we know we don't fully believe it, sooner or later we're going to crack, right? And so I think they're in the unique situation where it's like, it's not like if they had made it look like he had risen from the dead, they like, for us here, it's like, hey, we can just believe that. We weren't there. For them, they would have had to be like, oh, well, like, we did steal the body. And we're all going to take this to the grave now. And like, that's a different conversation.
And see, we're conflating two things because you make an allusion to it, which is correct in that there are people that have made the jump and killed themselves for something.
Yeah.
You know, Falun Gong, they had this cult out in Asia where they killed themselves and a bunch of other people with them. Jim Jones is a great example of how he gathers all these followers together. He kind of creates himself as this Messiah type figure, and then he has them all drink Kool-Aid and they all die. I mean, it's like lots of people that died. David Koresh out in Waco kind of set himself up as, you know, the Messiah, and of course went out in a blaze of glory. So what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of people that can gin up the strength to kill themselves or to end it all for a particular thing. That's not what we're talking about here, though. We're talking about how 11 men for the rest of their lives talked about something repeatedly and then went to their death. That's a whole lot different. So it's enough to say if somebody's crazy enough to be like, yeah, I believe this, yeah, and they're done.
Yeah.
But to get up every day and keep getting beat, to get warned, to lose money, to lose influence, to lose friends, and being warned like you're being excommunicated from this synagogue. And in the back of their heads, they're like, man, what if I'm doing something wrong? What if this is like really, what if the God of the Hebrews now doesn't like me? You know what I mean? Like all these things would have played into them. And one of the biggest things that they have to really wrestle with is who was this Jesus? Which is really what we have to wrestle with. Was he a liar? Did he just sell us a bunch of lies? Was he a lunatic? Did he delude himself into believing? And this comes from Mere Christianity. Gotta read that book.
It's a great.
Did you ever read that book?
I've read that book. Yeah,
Okay,
and
so
I love
I
that.
haven't finished reading this book. It's been years because it's like you read one page and like, wait, I got to read that again.
Yeah.
Am I an idiot? I get that.
Is there a version of this for 5-year-olds?
It makes me feel smart, but I don't know what it says.
Where are the pictures? I need those.
I feel really good eating this, but I don't know what I just ate. Anyhow. Mere Christianity, he talks about the typical the trifecta, I guess, of it is the liar. He was either a liar, he was either a Lord, or he was a lunatic. Okay, so if he was a liar and a lunatic, then he lied to everybody, which any of the writings, they actually brought in like psychoanalysts, and they looked at the Gospels, and they're like, this really doesn't seem like he's a lot of internal consistency here. He's here this one way, and they looked at it again as under the lunatic type of thing. Like, was he crazy? Was he deluded? And they're like, man, there's nothing psychologically weird about him at all. So, and obviously these people were like, well, I guess he's Lord, you know, like that didn't happen. But that's what C.S. Lewis is saying in Mere Christianity is like, you've got to have one of those three.
Yeah.
So either he lied about it and he knew it, or he was Lord, or he was a lunatic and he was just so deluded, or he actually was. And there really isn't anything beyond that. Like when you really rack your brain, you can't think of another iteration of that, you know, what Jesus was.
And so someone's listening and they're hearing the evidence. Maybe I'm pulling on this thread you alluded to earlier, right?
No, this is great. This is the best part of the podcast right here.
People are trying. They clicked on this. They're watching this because there's a part of them that wants to believe in Jesus, but like they're just trying to. They need enough evidence, enough proof,
right?
And so maybe lean into that. Talk about that a little bit. Like how much proof is enough?
Yeah. Well, that's what I would ask. So what proof is enough? You've known people like that, right?
Oh, sure.
Where they're like, oh, I would believe if you just. So what do you need? DNA? Did you see the OJ thing on Netflix?
I did not watch that. You told me about this earlier today, but I have not seen it. Oh my gosh. I have not seen it, but
so you know about OJ, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Too long ago. Am I the only one who lived through this? You didn't even live through it.
I just know about it, but the series special that was more recent, right?
You're not answering the question though. Did you live through it?
Did I live through it? When was this?
When would this have been?
When was OJ?
I'm 91.
I'm 90.
I born in
I'm
91.
92.
So I was.
So if he wasn't here, I wasn't
Oh
here.
yeah.
Do you guys know OJ?
I mean, I was very
Yeah.
little when this
Yeah,
was a
we were
thing,
young.
but
Yeah.
but
Okay. But nobody's heard about the Netflix OJ thing. Now everybody's gonna watch it. So apparently Netflix got this thing. It's like a 4 series about OJ Simpson trial and like what worked, what didn't work, what they should have done, what they shouldn't have done, and it's fascinating going through it. They've got DNA evidence. Okay, and so again, this could be potentially political. I don't mean for any of this to be political. I don't care one way or another. Well, I mean, I care, but like, I'm not trying to be political, and I don't want anybody to get upset. I got to be careful about people getting upset about everything, but I hope nobody gets upset about this. But it seems that if you have his DNA at the scene, his blood at the scene, one of his gloves at the scene that's blood soaked with his blood and her blood in the glove. The other glove is found at his house. There's blood in his car that drips all the way to his house. Okay. The shoe is a certain size. That is his size.
Mm-hmm.
The shoe is made by a manufacturer that he owns. Like, what more do you need? So, having said that, again, maybe, who knows? Okay. But even today, there are still people that argue over whether or not OJ did it. How is that? And so I'm not saying that we ought to equate Jesus and the resurrection with OJ Simpson.
It's a little different, but, yeah.
But what I want to make here is that no matter what you want to believe, that's going to be the end result of what you actually do wind up believing. If we had video evidence, and a lot of people say this, like, man, if I could just have a video of the crucifixion and the resurrection, what would you think?
What's interesting about that is I've heard someone talk about if you had Jesus came today, you're not wrestling with AI, you're wrestling with like people faking it, editing it.
yeah.
So you almost think that like even if we had that, there would be something that would come along that would cause doubt.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
It would make us think, yeah, but maybe.
Yes.
And it's like we want
Now do you see what I'm saying?
to be at 100% airtight.
It's a myth.
And it feels so it can
100%
feel
is a myth.
wrong. It feels like we're not allowed as a pastor and feel like you're not allowed to say,
Right.
can we be 100%?
100% is a myth. It's definitely a myth. And you know why? Because there might have been a time between like maybe 1950 and 1980 where video testimony would be, well, there it is. But no longer. Why? Because of AI. You know, we can manipulate things. And even then, you know, they fixed the moon landing. You know, like all that stuff that, again, not to get into all that. beeswax.
Somebody's about to YouTube that too.
Dude, we did Dumb and Dumber and the moon landing. This is great. And OJ. This is great. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there was a very slim bandwidth of time when that would have been admissible, or at least like, oh, look, there it is.
Yeah.
Is God not wise to say, I'm not going to trust it to a DNA test. I'm not going to trust it to scientific data to be verified or video testimony, that I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to make waves relationally, personally, who then are going to make waves. And if you choose to believe it, awesome. If you don't choose to believe it, that's kind of on you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I come at with this whole thing of 100%.
Yeah.
If someone says to me, like, I want you to give me 100% proof positive that Jesus rose from the dead. Even if I did, it wouldn't be enough.
Yeah.
And there's actually a psychological phenomenon called the closure paradox. And it's sometimes people call it closure anxiety, where if you think to yourself, what do I need to happen in order for me to put my trust in Jesus? Like, give me something. What would you say, man, if you could show me this, I would definitely follow Jesus?
Let's go with DNA evidence.
Okay, yeah.
You
DNA
know.
evidence of
We're
what?
on the OJ kick. DNA evidence.
DNA evidence of what? Like, this is Jesus' DNA?
Yeah.
Did you? Okay, this is going back a little bit, but there was this thing that was circulating, and it was total. I think it was Ron Wyatt who came up with it, but he basically said, I found the blood of Jesus. Have you heard of this? There's this guy, Ron Wyatt, long time ago. He came up with this idea that, man, I found the blood of Jesus, and I found it on the Ark of the Covenant. So he's found the Ark. He's found all of it. Like, he's, you know.
Indiana Jones
Yeah.
his way through
He
the
is, man. He knows it all. You know, he's got it in his garage. So he said, we We found the blood of Jesus, and it only has 24 chromosomes because it has his own and God. I'm like, this is such a misunderstanding of chromosomal patterns. You can't have 24. You would be like a blob, like if Jesus were a blob, then maybe. But anyhow, that circulated through the internet for like years. It'd be like, yeah, they found it. And only has 24 chromosomes. And everybody's like, wow, praise God. Point being, if you were to have your DNA evidence, what do you think would be your feeling of having secured DNA evidence? What would you feel like?
I feel like, just personally, so kind of going off of what you said, I feel like it probably wouldn't give me the feeling I'd want it to, right?
No, don't go to where I'm going. What would you feel? What would you feel? Now you have, here it is. This is Jesus.
Hey, this is great. This I can put this in a court of law and it'll stand up.
Yeah, now I'm going to follow Jesus, right? So what happens when you actually do get the readout? And I don't know how would they read it out? Yes, Yeshu Ben
Whatever you
Yosef?
said in the beginning.
Yeah. Or would they like, So what happens when you get the readout and now you put your trust in Jesus and you mess up tomorrow and you do something stupid, you talk back to your wife or, whatever. Like what would the feeling then be? And that's the whole closure paradox is that you have this buildup in your mind of, oh, if I had this amount of information, then it would change me. It would make me a different person.
Yeah.
And then now you have it and you're still the same slob you were before, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this sense that starts to factor in emotionally where you say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I didn't do enough. Maybe I need the next piece of evidence. And that's what the closure paradox is that we never achieve closure. And that's why I get so annoyed at this question. It's like, man, what would take 100%, whatever. Like you'll never achieve it. You'll never, ever achieve it because people are going to say like, okay, well, yeah, I would definitely follow Jesus. And then you mess up and you have this feeling of like, well, did I really? And we saw this with the Israelites when they left Egypt. When you're walking through the Red Sea, right? Sorry, I get all excited about that. But I mean, if we trust Disney, what was
Prince of Egypt.
Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, man.
Great movie.
Great movie, dude.
Horrible Hollywood version of it, though.
Maybe not
the
biblically
the two sides come up and you see a whale.
Yeah, dude.
Like, what? That's another podcast. Walking through this, you would have seen the wonders of God. Don't you think that would have been, I will never stray.
Yeah.
I will never have an impure thought again.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens? You get to the other side and you do. So
Yeah.
what would it make you do? It'd make you go like, maybe I did it wrong.
Yeah.
And then 4 months later, they're building a golden calf. Like, how crazy is that? The disciples, after Jesus rises from the dead, I think it's Luke 24, where it says, some believed, but others doubted. After they saw him rise again.
Yeah, physically
So-
looking at Jesus.
And it shows that the facts, more proof, more evidence isn't what changes you. And I think what people may feel, and I think there are people that agree with that are watching right now that agree with that, and maybe they're saying, I'm trying to get as close as possible to make that leap and to say, okay, now I'm ready to dive in and believe. And it's just getting enough of those building blocks to say, okay, I would almost just say like, is this reasonable to like believe in Jesus? And looking at what we just talked about, like we see evidence that he was a real person. We've been looking at the Bible in the last episode, and now we're saying this is who Jesus claimed to be. And so I think what I'm hearing you say, John, is like there gets a point where our pursuit can't just be for more facts and evidence. Like now it turns into something else. Now it turns into like, okay, you have enough of that. Now it's what are you going to do with him?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with what he invited you into?
Yeah.
And it seems like that's probably where you're going with this too.
It's also I think it helps us understand the wisdom of God is that he's not giving us evidence. He's giving us testimony. And see, this is the weird part when you really think of the wisdom of God in all this. If he keeps giving us evidence, we'll keep stretching the goalpost.
Yeah.
We'll keep saying, well, I just need a little more. I just need a little bit more. And it's a game that we play. And so God doesn't play, He's not going to play the evidence game. He's going to play the testimony game and say exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with what I've actually given to you? Annie Lamott has a great phrase. She says, the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's certainty. Because once you achieve certainty, you start to wonder, did I really? Because I'm not changed. Like there's nothing. And so I think that's where God's like, look, your best life. Don't even want to get into that, but I hate that phrase. But
I feel like I'm missing a quote or something when
your
you said
best
that.
life ever. You know what I'm talking about? Fill 'em in.
Like you're saying like just like
No,
they're
who wrote
living
the
their
book?
best life. I
wrote-
have no idea what you're talking about. A book?
Joel Osteen.
Oh, okay, I know him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
He's like, your best life now. That was like,
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah.
So I was like, do you not know Joel Osteen?
Oh, over my head.
All right. So anyhow, having said that, I know a lot of people are going to get mad I mentioned Joel Osteen, but because people love him. He's a nice guy. Sure. Make a
I'm
great
sure.
neighbor.
I'm sure he is. Yeah.
Great neighbor, bad theology. But anyhow, so I'd have him over to a cookout. But the whole idea of living your best life now isn't about getting everything assured and certain. It actually is a life of faith. It's not having the certainty. And that's what, like, having faith builds faith. It's weird. You know, like you have to choose to believe regardless of what you think or know. And I think that's where God comes to us.
You're just saying basically, man, God knows us so well and our nature so well that he's going to give us what we need because we wouldn't be happy anyway if he put everything out there.
100%.
And I think there's value in that too. Like even just God is a relational God, right? And so even in theory, it's like, man, how good's the relationship if he gave us everything we needed anyway? And there wasn't that little element of trust of like, no, you are who you say you are, right? I think we've all had like friends or people, and it's like some of the times when they come through for you is not when you're certain that they will. Like some of those meaningful times is when they come through for you, and you're like, oh, like I knew that, like I'd hoped they would, but like I didn't know for certain that they would. But they show up, you know, in the times you need it most. They show up at your house with food when it's like you're moving in, and it's like I have no time for anything. You're dealing with the kids, like, and so I do think there's that relational piece too, where it's like, man, if God designed us for a relationship, there's that little jump that we have to make that the relationship is all about. And why would he fill that gap with something else when he knows that's what we need and our souls need and what he wants from us too?
Yeah, that's well put. Yeah. It's the process of faith that actually satisfies.
Yeah.
And you might think it's the opposite. I hate this. I got to choose to believe.
Yep.
I want certainty. The minute you had it, you wouldn't be happy. You know, so it's like Jesus knows that the more we thirst for him, I mean, he says it, blessed are you who believe even though you don't see. That's not just a Hallmark card, like happy ending to the book of John. It's more like, no, you're actually the happiest when you have faith without seeing. When you see it, that's when you wonder, like, and you've had that feeling, haven't you?
Yeah.
Where it's like you have that big moment on a retreat weekend or something like that, and you're
sure.
like, oh, God is so real. And you write it down, you're like, oh, I gotta remember this. And then like 3 months later, you're like, oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it fades.
Mhm.
It fades its impact.
Mhm.
And so we're given a lot of good evidence. I still would say this is still great evidence.
Yeah,
but
this is
we're right. But we're
We just completely reworked it.
yeah.
right?
But
Like-
we're arriving at now is the heart of it. So
Yeah.
there is really great evidence. But now we're getting to this point, and someone's struggling with that gap right there, and they're saying, "Hey, all I've really searched for is the evidence."
Yeah.
And now I'm hearing that like that's not going to satisfy. You could get there is no 100% on this, which can be frustrating. It can be frustrating to say like my pursuit is for that 100% to close the gap, but we don't see that often in life at all. Is there's always these little gaps. And so how does someone switch? Like, do they have to now ignore the evidence side and go all in on just, I don't care about that anymore. I'm just gonna choose to believe, or like, how do they start leaning into the relationship?
Yeah.
What does that look like? How do they do that? And how's that different than, I don't know, hunting for evidence? If that makes sense.
I think a lot of it's what you just said. It's almost like I think the evidence is like a map that gets you to like you ever like go to a park and it's like, cool, we're gonna go to this park and they're like, we're gonna jump off this cliff into the water and it's gonna be awesome. And then you like go up the trail, you get to the spot. You still have to jump off, right, to make it happen. I think so much of the evidence is like it's getting to us to the point where we have to make the decision and make the jump. I think we get in our own way a lot too, where it's like sometimes I think based on how we view ourselves, like, hey, leave physical evidence out of it, leave like historical evidence out of it. I think sometimes like we're not willing to jump that gap just of even how we're wrestling with how we see ourselves, right? Jonathan Bakuda has this message. I think Forrest Frank's like worked it into a song where it's talking about how parents or soon-to-be parents who are going to adopt kids have to essentially fill out paperwork that draws a line at some point of who they're willing to adopt. And so there'll be like questions on there like, hey, are you willing to adopt somebody who's in a wheelchair? Like, would you be willing to care for somebody that way for the rest of their life? Be willing to adopt somebody with mental disabilities and all the challenges that comes with it? And it forces them to have this real moment where like, would I be willing to do that? And what's beautiful about God is like he looks at each of us and he says, there's no box that that I wouldn't check to say, yes, I got you. Like, they're mine, right?
Mm.
And I think we say no for him all the time and making that jump. Like, we're afraid to believe, like, does
Mm.
God love me that much?
Mm.
Does the creator of the universe who sent Jesus here to die for me, that I've just seen all the evidence about, love me that much?
Mm.
And man, like he can say it all day long. We can look at the evidence all day long, but it's still a relationship.
Mm.
And so like even today, like, man, this is the biggest question for Christianity, for our faith.
Yeah.
And so like the biggest miss today would be somebody listen to this and you've heard all the evidence for it and you're like, cool, like the Texas thing, the historical thing,
Mhm.
great. But maybe there's something still in your heart that's prohibiting you from making that decision. And today would
Yeah.
just be the day to step into that and to say, all right, like I'm going to make the jump.
Yeah.
God loves me. Jesus came here for me to adopt me as the son or God of the Most High God, right? Or son or daughter of the Most High God. And so like, man, I think sometimes it's that piece for us that's actually holding us back, even as opposed to the evidence.
It-
Yeah, and I think
That
you
makes
can
sense.
you can like I want to jump on what you were saying. What do you want to say?
Well, I was just gonna say that it just made me think of this as you're talking, that there's like an emotional component that we miss out on,
Yeah.
that, I don't know, just cold hard evidence and facts don't really give us, is we can spend so much time trying to figure out, did Jesus actually say this? Was he real? Which doesn't
Mhm.
mean that's not important to like consider and think about. But at some point, you then just have to say, like, well, what did he just say?
Mhm.
And do I believe that? Do I feel that?
Yeah.
Because when you think about any relationship you've been in, maybe someone you're dating or married to someone, and there can be like this, I'm just gonna try to prove to my wife that I love
Yeah.
her. I'm just gonna try to like do things just to
Mhm.
like prove it, get you things, whatever. But if it's void of any emotion or real connection, it's almost like, cool, like I don't know that proof actually works for me,
Mhm,
because
mhm.
there's no real connection, no
Yeah.
moment. I feel like we get invited into this, just spend time with me
Yeah.
and what I said in scripture. I feel like that emotions actually drive the most significant changes in our life, not
Yeah.
just cold hard facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and jumping on that, and this is for me, it's like, so it's a self-analysis.
Mm.
So in my quest for certainty, certainty to know something for sure is a powerful thing. I mean, when we arrive on eternity's shore, and God is like, well done, good and faithful servant. And we walk across that meadow into heaven, and whether it's here, whatever it is, Jesus has returned, and we see the Garden of Eden, the New Jerusalem, whatever, and we're like, that's going to be a powerful thing. And because that's a powerful thing, we've got to wonder, like, are we after the power of that? Of like, I understand it, I have it, it's mine. And we think about certainty, like we've all been talking about, like, okay, man, it'll be awesome to be certain, 100% certain. I know for sure that Jesus was the Messiah, so I'm going to put my trust in him. And we think, bam, my whole relationship with God is going to take off from here on. I'm going to be a super disciple. First of all, it's wrong. Not going to happen. You're still human. You're still going to mess up. And actually, the messing up part of it in the face of certainty is going to really ruin you, because then you're going to be like, I must have done something wrong. I must have the wrong information. Now you're going to be looking for more stuff. And that's what the whole closure paradox is about. However, I think one of the best things we can take from any of this, and I hope people are encouraged by this, and usually people aren't encouraged by more work, but the work is to say, like, so what's driving you? So when you hear this podcast, were you ready to sit down and be like, oh, I'm going to arm up, I'm going to get lots of bullets that I can fire at people online, or I can get lots of arguments, sustain what I believe. Those are power-oriented desires. And as far as I can tell, the whole idea of following Jesus is surrender. It's not a power. It's giving up power. It's following him. And that's why I think that's one of my biggest life goals, is to figure out, why does God want faith from us so much? It's always like, nah, I want you to have faith. I'm going to hide myself a little bit here. I'm going to be quiet for a while. You're going to have to seek to find me. Like, why? Why wouldn't it just be easy? Because I think what we naturally as humans, because of the fall, I think we're naturally geared towards stocking up, having power, being in charge, having control over my destiny. And if you're sitting down listening to a podcast like this saying, like, I need to get filled up with the right arguments. I need to have, I'm going to be powerful. I'm going to be, like, a lot of that's I. And really, to follow Jesus, I think it's much more of like, not I, like surrendering, giving into his will. And I don't want to over spiritualize it or like over poeticize it at all. But I do think that the reason why, if you're asking, I want 100% whatever, you're interested in power. You're interested in your own self-determination. And so you're not going to find it. You're not going to find it because that's not the way Jesus is accessed. I think the way that Jesus is accessed is when we come to the end of our power, when we come to the end of our intellect, when we come to the end of like, I don't know what to believe, but I choose to believe in you, even if I don't have an argument, even if I don't have the right way to say it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to encourage people here, like if you're struggling and you watch this podcast and you're like, I want to be able to at least have faith again. I want to arm up. I would say don't listen to our arguments so much because there's plenty of them. God is rational. That there are some amazing things that you can learn, about God and to see proof of his identity and the fact that he was who he was. But the best thing you can do is analyze your motives. Like, are you looking for power or are you looking for surrender? And if you really want to follow Jesus, then you're looking to surrender everything you have. And then the arguments come. The arguments come on top of that original choice of choosing to decide, even if you don't have a reason to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And
so that's why I don't like the question.
Yeah,
I started off in the beginning. I'm like, I hate this question because it's geared with it's all packed with all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think what we brought is giving people really good evidence to build upon. But at the end of the day, the thing that we can't decide for you is what you choose to do with it. You could give all the evidence in the world, get as close as humanly possible. But at the end of the day, you have to decide if it's true, if Jesus is who he says he was, and then if you're going to lean into a relationship with him. And that's the invitation. We have all of this evidence around it, but at the end of the day, it's sitting down and saying, am I going to choose to follow Jesus? Because what Jesus does in us, how he transforms us, that's what we really want. That's what's really going to make us feel complete. And it doesn't always make it easy. And there's still a journey while we follow him and in relationship with him. But that's where the evidence and studying and learning this stuff becomes a joy and it's supplemental to the main thing, which is really surrendering. I like how you said that, John, just surrendering to Jesus and choosing to follow him. And so I hope it's helpful to hear some of that evidence, but really, whether or not it's true and what you're going to do with it really falls on you in making that decision. And so we've established Jesus claims he is God, and we believe that is true, that he is God. And what we want to look at next week is if Jesus is God, we've got God in the Old Testament and the New. And it would appear that they're different. It would appear like, why does God seem so like violent in the Old Testament? And almost like there's times where it might feel like, I don't know if I like this God. And then suddenly God shows up in human form in the New Testament, and it's like, is he a pacifist? I mean, like, here's all this war, and now he's a pacifist? And so we want to get into that and dive into, did God change? And is the God of the Old Testament different now in the New Testament? So that's what we're getting into in the next episode. What Jesus is saying about loving your enemies is God, but then at the same time, Old Testament, when there is extreme violence, or hey, I am going to destroy this city, this town, how is that consistent?
God's anger at sin is like a parent's anger would be at his kid's cancer. He doesn't hate the kid, he hates the cancer.
I could see God enacting wrath and judgment on sinful, wicked people that have been given tons of opportunity. But what about children? Those are tough because, again, now you're talking about legitimate innocence.
I'd probably mid-wrestle with that one, where it's like, I don't know enough to be like, hey, this is exactly why.
If you're only looking at the Old Testament and you're saying, like, what's up with that? You've got to read it in balance with the New Testament of, like, the very same God of wrath suffered the God of wrath for us.